A new assessment warns that Beijing, Moscow, Tehran, and Pyongyang have demonstrated the capability and intent to advance their interests at the expense of the United States and its allies, despite the pandemic. Maybe because of it. And the warning comes as President Biden is set to announce a full withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan by September to coincide with the 20th anniversary of the September 11th attacks. Top security officials are expected to testify before the Senate Intelligence Committee today. Willie.
Let's bring in the former Secretary of Homeland Security under President Obama to talk about all this, Jay Johnson. Mr. Secretary, good to see you this morning. Let's start with Afghanistan and the announcement we're expected to hear from President Biden today that before the 20th anniversary of September 11th, almost 20 years since that October day when the first troops set foot in the country, that they'll be coming home, all of them. What's your reaction to that, and what do you think are the implications for the global threat assessment? What does it mean for the threat of terrorism from that part of the world?
Well, the first time I visited Afghanistan when I was General Counsel of the Defense Department in 2009, there were things that struck me. One, it's a mountainous terrain. It is largely ungoverned space, very tribal, and the Taliban basically takes the attitude that we may have the watches, but they have the time. Not much has changed over the last 12 years. They've essentially been waiting us out until we finally leave. We have to be realistic that when that happens, they will likely overrun the country. They will overwhelm the existing government. There will be a huge setback to women's rights. There are not many good solutions. There is no obvious better solution to leaving. Ideally, there should be a three-way agreement between the Taliban, the Afghan government, and the United States, but that's not going to happen. So we have to be realistic about our options here.
What about the option, like Richard Haas was discussing a little bit earlier, small footprint, something much smaller in terms of troops, but on the model of Germany or Korea, where we're there, can easily tamp down any threats of terrorism that do rise? Why not do that?
I agree with Richard. There should be something retained in place in Afghanistan to ensure that no terrorist organization that threatens the United States can reestablish a caliphate there. I very much agree with that. Whether it should be a footprint as large as South Korea or Germany, I think is a very different question, and I'm not sure that's realistic.
The Secretary Peter Baker of the New York Times is here with a question. Peter?
Hello, Peter.
Secretary, good to talk to you. How are you?
Okay.
It's remarkable that we're here 20 years ago. I was a reporter at the time that the Washington Post. I actually arrived in northern Afghanistan just days after 9/11 and was there the night the bomb started in October of 2001. And I never would have expected that night that we would still be there 20 years later. And yet, of course, the concerns that you just raised and other people have raised seem very real. I wonder what lessons we should take from the withdrawal from Iraq, which was presided over by Joe Biden when he was vice president, only to then have to turn around and come back on some level in different form after the rise of ISIS. Is there a way that we can avoid that same sort of scenario where leaving even the small footprint we already have makes us have to turn around and come back at some point because of unanticipated circumstances?
Peter, that's a real risk. Lesson one, it actually is much easier to get into an armed conflict than it is to get out of one. Lesson two, counterinsurgency in a country as large as Afghanistan rarely works, requires a sustained commitment of very large resources, and was probably never going to work in a country like Afghanistan. We do need to retain enough there to ensure that our own homeland security, domestic security interests are maintained. I hope the Biden administration has thought about exactly what that needs to be. But those who know history know that very often we often repeat the mistakes of the past. And it's much easier to get into something like this, much harder. And we've been struggling with this now for over a decade to figure out what a lasting peace looks like and how to get out of a situation like this. I'm afraid that we don't have many choices at this point at the 20-year mark except to leave. I hope we retain enough there to ensure that our own national security interests are protected.
Jonathan Lemire has the next question. Jonathan?
Secretary Johnson, good to see you this morning. Of course, the invasion of Afghanistan was done because of the rise of terror groups who used that country as a place to launch the attacks on the United States. But that global worldwide terror assessment, global worldwide threat assessment, I should say, that we were just discussing, points to more potent dangers coming from nation states, China among them. Kind of wanted to get your take, if you could give us a sort of a global look, if you will, from 30,000 feet, as of whether you agree with that assessment and which nations, China, perhaps others, pose the greatest threats to the U.S. and what kind of threats?
That's exactly what this is going to be, a 30,000-foot assessment. I don't have access to the intel anymore, though Peter Baker and his colleagues at the New York Times are pretty good. I think it's important that the report highlights also non-traditional threats. In my judgment, the long-term principal threat to our national security is global warming and climate change, specifically the effects of severe weather events on aging infrastructure and the ability to upend global populations. In the short term, obviously, the principal threat to our national security is COVID-19, and the Biden administration is focused keenly on that right now. In the midterm, the principal threat to our national security, in my judgment, is what you were just talking about. The events of January 6th represent a significant domestic-based national security threat to our country. I encourage everybody to look at the study that just came out of the University of Chicago, Professor Robert Pate, that actually does an analysis of the demographics of the group that attacked the Capitol on January 6th. It is better educated. It comes from blue states as well as red states. The fear of displacement, the baseless fear of the increasing diversity of our nation. And what we saw on January 6th, the report reveals, is the tip of the iceberg. And that iceberg did not evaporate on January 20, when President Trump left office. In my judgment, in the midterm, that is our principal national security threat.
All right, former Secretary of Homeland Security, Jay Johnson, always great to have you on the show. Thank you very, very much. And Peter Baker, thank you as well for your reporting this morning. And still ahead on Morning Joe, we'll speak with member of the Senate Armed Services and Foreign Relations Committee, Tim member of the Armed Services and Foreign Relations Committee, Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia. And Senator, we got a lot of questions for you. It's great to see you this morning. We'll start with Iran. Thank you. You and 26 of your colleagues signed a letter to President Biden urging him to rejoin the Iran nuclear agreement. It reads in part, while the damage of the last 4 years has left our country facing numerous challenges across the globe, there is no question that one of your early pressing national security priorities should be to return to the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action to address the threat of Iran's nuclear program. As such, we are encouraged that indirect talks are underway in Vienna aimed at reviving the nuclear agreement. It seems, Senator Tim Kaine, there's a lot to undo from the past 4 years. What makes this the very top priority?
Mika, the fact that the talks are going on is very helpful because President Trump's decision to blow up diplomacy has made the region less safe, has hurt our relationships with our allies, and even made our relationships with adversaries like Russia and China more difficult because they were part of the deal that we negotiated. Iran was complying with the deal by all estimation. President Trump's own national security team, Secretaries Tillerson and Mattis, says we should stay in, but the president made us less safe by pulling out. We need to go back into the deal so that we don't see Iran doing things like enriching past the limits that the U.S. basically told them you don't need to comply with these anymore when the U.S. backed out of the deal. We should go back into the deal, hopefully get Iran to comply again with the limitations. We would undertake to carry out our responsibilities, and then we need to focus on other instances of Iranian misbehavior. U.S. hostages in Iran, their bellicose activities in Yemen and elsewhere, but we should do it with their nuclear program under both constraints and an inspection regime that will let us know what they're doing so we can protect our regional allies.
Senator Kaine, let's move west one country to Iraq. We're going to hear this morning or sometime today from President Biden that on the 20th anniversary, before that date of September 11th, all troops will be coming home from Afghanistan. What's your reaction? Is that the right call?
Willie, the White House called me about 6 to 8 weeks ago, and this is exactly what I recommended that they do. I know they were getting recommendations from many, many people, and none of the choices were easy, but I think it's the right call for two reasons. The U.S. military has done what it can in 20 years. For 10 years, we degraded al-Qaeda and eventually killed bin Laden, and in the 10 years since, we've now trained nearly 500,000 Afghan army and police so that they can assume responsibility for the security of their own country. 20 years, we've done what we can. The Afghans have to shoulder that burden. With the assistance of the U.S. as a partner on diplomacy and humanitarian aid and development, but the U.S. military has done what it can, and 21 years or 25 or 30 is not going to appreciably change the situation. The second reason it's the right thing to do is we have to focus. In the cruelty of life, you sometimes have to say, what are the top priorities? And right now, the U.S.'s top security challenge is working with allies to curb aggression from China and Russia, and in my view, promoting prosperity and stability in the Americas. Those are our two top challenges now. The Middle East is no longer the top area of strategic, engagement and challenge for the United States. It's the Indo-Pacific and the Americas. Joe Biden wants to turn our attention and focus on what we need to do in 2021 and beyond.
As you know, the objective when the United States and allies first went 20 years ago to Afghanistan was to destroy it as a safe haven for terrorists to organize and launch further attacks. Do you worry that by leaving, we now leave ourselves open and that it just kind of reconstitutes itself and goes back to what it was 20 years ago?
We're going to continue to have to work in tandem with the Afghan government, again, in diplomacy and humanitarian aid and development, to make sure that that doesn't happen. But we can't want stability for Afghanistan more than the Afghans do. And we have invested heavily over 20 years with the military involvement, thousands dead, tens of thousands injured. It's time to refocus our attention on the areas that in 2021 are the areas of most strategic importance to the U.S. military.
Senator King, good morning. It's Casey Hunt. You mentioned China as part of our new focus here. I'm wondering, what impact do you think this prolonged conflict in Afghanistan, the strain, the wear and tear on our U.S. military, on soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines who've been there time and time and time again, are we ready to turn and potentially engage in a conflict with a major nation state if China were to move on Taiwan? I mean, what is the state of our military in the wake of this conflict?
Casey, that's a fantastic question. And look, I don't think anyone is intending for us to be in an instantaneous military engagement with China. God forbid. We need to work with China in a million ways and stand up and confront them on behavior that's unacceptable. But this is not a new Cold War or merging to a hot war. I don't view it that way. But you are right. Look, 20 years has taken a toll. I live in Virginia, which is the most connected state to the American military of any. Repeated deployments. I was with a National Guard unit on Saturday, and when I was governor, I went to so many deployments and homecomings and wakes and funerals, and it takes a toll. China has also benefited tremendously, in a sad way, from the U.S. military engagements over the last 20 years. In fact, if you were to ask who won the U.S.'s war in Iraq, the answer is probably China, because China watched the U.S. fight battles, learned our fighting style, saw the weapons we had, went to school on us, and developed their own own military capacities to check against us. So we need to stop, the forever wars in the parts of the world that are no longer of the utmost strategic importance, and reserve our focus and energy of the highly capable U.S. military for the areas that are going to be the domains of challenge in the next decades.
Senator Jonathan Lemire with the Associated Press has a question for you. John?
Great.
Senator, good morning. I want to keep skipping around the globe with you, if we could, and turn our attention to Russia. The White House read out yesterday that President Biden had a phone call with President Putin, in which he expressed concerns about the troop buildup in Ukraine, and also floated a summit between the two leaders at some point later this year. So a couple of questions for you. What do you make of that idea? Is a summit a worthwhile pursuit right now in this first year of the Biden administration? And what sort of message should the administration, the U.S. On the whole, be sending about that troop buildup, but also the treatment of Alexei Navalny, the political prisoner whose health, according to reports, is really deteriorating in Russia right now?
So in reverse order, we have to take a strong stand for human rights in Russia. The treatment of this dissident, Alexei Navalny, is outrageous, and we have to look at the tools that we have available, sanctions and others, to penalize Russia for doing that and expose more broadly to the world the kind of thuggish and corrupt behavior involved there. I have no problem at all with the idea of President Biden wanting to do a summit with Vladimir Putin. When President Trump said he wanted to do a summit with Kim Jong-un, I said the same thing. Look, dialogue guarantees nothing, but the absence of dialogue almost always works badly. So you go into a dialogue or a summit like this with low expectations, but then you look for opportunities to build a relationship. Joe Biden is very confident in his knowledge of the world and of Russia's geopolitics right now, and I think if conditions were right, that would make sense. There are areas where we are working in tandem with Russia. We continue to work in tandem with them in some counterterrorism areas. And remember, Russia was part of the negotiating team that helped put limits on Iran's nuclear program, because they don't want a nuclear Iran either. If we rejoin the JCPOA, we will be back in a deal working in tandem with Russia and China, as well as our traditional allies.
Senator Mike Barnicle has a question for you. Mike?
Senator, we're going to bring it home now to the United States of America to wrap up this interview, and we thank you for your time. It is entirely possible that the George Floyd trial could end before Dante Wright, a 20-year-old victim who was shot and killed by police a few days ago outside of Minneapolis, is buried. You were governor of a state that has had a sad history of sometimes racial conflicts with police, including one recently that was on videotape of an Army lieutenant being abused by police officers. You're a United States Senator who now represents the state that you once governed. Would you agree with the contention held by many? It's brief and it's simple, but it's stark, that it's safer to be white in America.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's a lingering tragedy, Michael, that we have to work to resolve. The Minnesota instance this week with Dante Wright, heartbreaking. The Virginia instance, an Army lieutenant medic in a community that is very supportive of the military, Southeast Virginia, gets abused in a just, I think, inexplicably racist way by police officers. And even once they see that he's a lieutenant, and once they see that his car has a license plate, they keep it up and use pepper spray on him and use a knee strike to knock him to the ground. It is more existentially perilous every day walking around in the streets of this country if you have black or brown skin. And so we have to do a lot, but police reform is really, really important. I'm a co-sponsor of Cory Booker's bill that would reform the qualified immunity doctrine that basically shields police departments from accountability for their own recklessness. And if you allow recklessness, you get recklessness. And that's what we're seeing, and we've got to curb it.
All right, Senator Tim Kaine, thank you so much for being on the show this morning. We will see you again soon, we hope. And coming up, the very latest from the Minneapolis area. Resignations and unrest, as we mentioned, followed the deadly police shooting of Dante Wright. While just a few miles away, the defense begins its case in the trial of the former police officer accused of killing George Floyd. Meanwhile, the families of both Wright and Floyd come together to call for justice and reform. Morning Joe is coming right back.
I want to weigh in on what was said here
Joe Biden is very confident.
in regards to the international diplomacy. I agree with everything that this senator has talked about, up until a point of saying that the black and the brown people here in America are in more danger than the white people. Unless you have been targeted, regardless of what color that you are, you're not going to be able to relate to what is being said in the right format or the right sequences of understanding that it's not just a black and white issue. If it was a black and white issue, it would be much, much, much more simpler to understand. This is not about black and white and brown and yellow and red and other types of colors pertaining to cultures. This is about right and wrong. This is about good and bad. And we as an Americans should be able to see through the color scheme and understanding this isn't about color. It's about right and wrong. I, as an American, white-blooded human being that was born here in America in 1961, can defiably speak out to say that my life has been under attack for quite some time, either by one entity or another. Either by the so-called church entity or the political entity towards people wanting to destroy my purpose. And it's the same way with anybody out there that's of a godly sort. I don't care what color that you are. I know it glares in looking at that the black race has more of a potential towards being targeted than the white race. But the bottom line is this. It's just that the consequences, the circumstances, and the media focuses more on a black individual right now being discredited than they do the whites or the reds or the yellows, the Asian people. There's too much meanness going on throughout the world to focus just upon a color scheme. This is not about a color scheme. It is about a supernatural entity that is targeting various people who are of not an Asian descent, not a Native American descent, not an African American descent, but of a godly descent. And if you are of a true godly descent, I promise you, you will be under a magnifying glass. To the point of everything that you say and do will be scrutinized the exact same way towards what happened to the Lord Jesus Christ during the time that he was being scrutinized of his ministry. These evil demonic spirits out here, they know who the godly descent is. They know. Don't ask me how they know, but they know. They even knew whenever Jesus was walking amongst them. They walked up to Jesus in the desert and said, "We know who you are. You are the Holy One. Hast thou come to torment us before our time?" Jesus asked them, "Who are they?" They replied back, "Legion," which means many devils. They was bonded together at that point in time. And then they could become frightened because they realized that Jesus had the power to destroy them. Well, rather than destroy them because they pleaded not to be destroyed, Jesus threw them, the evil demonic spirits, off into the swine, and the swine run off the cliff and basically killed themselves. The point that I'm trying to make is this. These same evil demonic entities today has not lost their ability to understand and identify who the godly entities are. If anything, they have tightened their resources to the point that now they have even twice, maybe three times the amount of capability of knowing who, in their eyes, are their enemies. I said in their eyes. Because the fact of the matter is, it was the demonic evil spirits that cast the first lick, that started this spiritual warfare to begin with, by thinking that they was going to uproot or overpower the Lord in his kingdom. And we basically have the same thing going on right here on the planet Earth, to where these evil demonic spirits can manipulate people's understanding and eyes to the point that they try to turn it around of acting like that it's us of the godly that created the problem or that started the war, and the whole time it's been them. So unless you've really studied what's going on here, you're not going to be able to identify what's really happening. Once more, it's not about nations. It's not about color as far as culture. It's not about education. It's not even about money as far as power. But what it is about, it's about good versus bad. And I think if this man here could have had his say so on his particular platform this morning in what he was talking about, I feel like that he would have explained that the same way, similar towards how that I'm explaining it. Of course, keep in mind, whenever you're explaining stuff like this to the general public, give or take, there's going to be about a third to half that they're going to swing at it and miss it by 3 foot every time, because they're not going to understand this spiritual warfare, because they're so blinded and they're so gullible and they're so deceived. They're not going to be able to relate to this. And because of it, if you speak out like I'm speaking out right now, it could actually backfire towards making you look like an idiot, or you looking like that you're crazy, because you're talking about these deep, fundamental things that most people don't look at. But the bottom line is this. Something has to motivate an individual towards doing what that individual is doing, regardless whether it be a good entity or a bad entity. Something is influencing that person towards them doing what they're doing. That's what we call a motive. Something has given that person a motive, regardless whether they be trying to be like Mother Teresa or the Pope towards trying to save society, or they be like Hitler towards trying to destroy society. There's no doubt what we're going up against is supernatural. It's in the spiritual. And it's up to us, to not only figure it out, but to try to explain it to the general public so that the general public can figure it out, to be able to understand just exactly what the hell is going on here. I agree with everything that man right there that you're seeing on your display monitor on your telephone. I agree with everything that he said up until a certain point, that the white people has a better chance of surviving in America than the black. I do not agree with that. And maybe it's because that I've been picked on, punched on, slandered, demonized, demoralized, decredited, probably as much or more so than anybody because of this spiritual warfare that I'm talking about. But the bottom line is this: if you think that because you're white, you have a better survival rate in America than you do if you're yellow, red, or black, you got another thought coming. This is not about a color scheme. It never has been about a color scheme. It was Satan that wanted to plant the seed in people's minds and in people's hearts in thinking that it was a color scheme. It's never been about color. It's been about right and wrong. It's been about good and evil. It's never been about color. The perilous times right now that we're facing, we're not just facing these perilous times here in America, but we're facing them all over the world. And there's no doubt, as I'm ending in my statements here, there's no doubt that Donald J. Trump upset the apple cart. He definitely upset the apple cart, not only on a national level, but on an international level. And in some instances, the apple cart needed to be toppled. It needed to be turned over so that we could analyze and look at the truth towards what the hell is going on. So some of the stuff that Donald Trump has done, if there's a silver lining to any of it, has been on a good factor, as long as we will interpret it that way and grow from it as far as learning from our mistakes. As far as upsetting the international apple cart, it can be looked at and viewed the same exact way towards taking these opportunities and learning from them and growing with them in our alliances, with our allies. Because some of these countries that have exhilarated themselves in basically ruling their citizens the way that they have, as far as I'm concerned, they have come from the very pits of hell. How that they have tried to dominate and rule their societies. And we didn't have to go too far to see that, regardless whether it was Mexico or South America or other places throughout the world. Once more, whenever it comes to fairness, there's nothing fair about what evil has tried to do to good. There's nothing fair about it. Even Moses declared that to the Pharaohs again and again and again. Let my people go. You have my people in captivity. Let my people go. And it wasn't until God showed up onto the scene and openly demonstrated these demonstrations before the Pharaohs, before finally they got the message towards letting God's people go. Didn't have nothing to do with culture. Didn't have nothing to do with whether or not you was from Egypt or whether or not you was considered a Canaanite. It had to do with right and wrong. It had to do with good and evil. The Pharaohs at that time was working in the unisons of evil. But yet now they was calling their stance in life good. Moses knowed what they was doing was evil. and he was calling them out towards what that they was doing was evil. It didn't have nothing to do with the color of Pharaoh's skin. It didn't have nothing to do with Pharaoh's abilities towards what he was in power of. What it had to do with is who did he represent? Pharaoh represented evil. Moses represented good. Now they claim that beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. And one man's loss is another man's gain. So it just depends on what side of the fence that one is on, of whether or not he or she is going to not only look at the glass towards it being half full or half empty, but it's going to be up to that individual in determining if half full means being positive or half empty means being positive. Because in some people's eyes, they actually see evil as it being good. They're that mixed up. They're that troubled. That's what we're going up against. We're going up against an evil entity that has tried to deceive the whole world in thinking and believing the way that it believes. And because it knows that it has failed in these areas, as the book of Revelation speaks of, that Satan will rise up in great wrath because he knoweth he has lost in this competition. Because he knows that he is soon to be not just judged, but condemned and sentenced to hell. And because of this, he is fighting tooth and nail towards trying to stop the doomsday day that has already been selected by the Heavenly Father of when it's to take place and where it is to take place, which is the new temple that will be built over in Jerusalem. Until people really dig deep in understanding the fundamentals of all of this and put aside these images and these graphics pertaining to these color schemes and all these other different types of images that are nothing more than something to deter people from looking at the right thing. Until people are willing to look at the fundamentals of all of this, they're going to swing at it as a batter on a mound playing baseball, playing on a league, some sort of a league. They're going to swing at it and miss it by 3 foot. They're not going to be able to understand what the hell is going on. And of course, somebody like me comes onto the scene and tries to explain it to them in a much more profound, fundamental, deeper way. And now all of a sudden I'm the bad guy. Or now all of a sudden I'm the nut. Or now all of a sudden I'm the guy that's touched in the head. Simply because I can see through the smoke screen of the color scheme in identifying that it's much, 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 much deeper than just the color of a human being's hair, or a human being's eyes, or a human being's color of their skin. Whenever it comes to the way that I personally have been targeted by these evil demonic spirits, and I'm just not talking about right here in Northwest Tennessee. I'm talking about, in generally speaking, regardless whether I was in Atlanta, regardless whether I was in Phoenix, Arizona, regardless whether I was out in California, regardless whether I was up in Kentucky, regardless whether I was out in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, regardless whether I was up in eastern Tennessee or up towards Nashville, Davidson County, Tennessee, or even Shelby County, Tennessee, down towards Memphis. I know for a fact what has been attacking me has been an evil entity. And these evil entities don't have a color. They're invisible whenever it comes to them being They're colorless. I guess if they have any color at all, it would be the color of darkness, the color of black, the color of emptiness, the color of cold, if they have a color at all. But by and large, they're invisible, and you can't see them, smell them, taste them. 9 times out of 10, you can't hear them. 9 times out of 10, you can't feel them. Unless you're super sensitive in having these gifts and understanding these type of powers that are just as real today as what they was whenever Jesus or Job or Elijah or any of the other prophets of God stood forth. They're just as real today, if not more realer today, than what they ever have been. So the only thing that I don't agree with what this individual has said today is that the black race is more in danger here in America than the white race. I do not agree with that statement. And it's not because I don't want to be prejudiced. It's not because I think that he's prejudiced or he's not prejudiced. It's that I believe that is the wrong statement to make. If you're going to make any statement at all, you need to state the fact that if you are a true, born-again, God-fearing Christian, not a make-believe Christian, not a so-called Christian, but if you are a godly person with a godly fundamental background, you have a target. You are more substance of being messed with, hurt, examined, scrutinized, demonized, dehumanized, similar towards the exact same thing that happened to the Lord Jesus Christ over 2,000 years ago whenever he was walking and talking amongst us in the bodily form. Now that is my analogy of the way that I see it and how that I have interpreted it, and it's my duty to take the information that God has given unto me and give it to you. Now, what you do with it from this point on is going to be up to you. And if you want to believe in the Mungo Gumbo that he just got through talking about, that the black race is more in danger than the white race here in America, well, then so be it. You believe in his ideology. I don't believe in his ideology. Obviously, I believe in my ideology towards what I just got through explaining to you, that it's about a supernatural entity. Now, you have a choice. You can either believe him or you believe me. But the bottom line is right now, we're at war. Right now, America is under siege. And if we're not under siege in one direction, we're under siege in another direction. If we're not having commotions going on over here, we're having commotions going on over there. If we're not having problems over here, we're having problems over there. Who's creating these problems? Who's stirring the pot? I'll let you be the judge of that. Good luck to each and every one of us as we end the program again and again and again, to be able to correspond with the Windmill Ministries here at 291 Thompson Road, Sharon, Tennessee, zip code 38255. And thanks again for listening and allowing for us to be part of your lives in disclosing the truth, nothing but the truth, the whole truth, to not only the American people, but to the world. Shalom, God bless, and God bless America, and good luck to all of us.